Hi, today I'd like to address a passage that someone shared under one of my videos, which is a common passage used to defend the idea of a full-time salaried pastor. It's 1 Corinthians 9:14, where we read, "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel." Now, in 1 Corinthians 9:14, Paul is mainly talking about gospel workers, such as apostolic workers or evangelists, and not pastors, teachers. Now, there could be some overlapping in the work that is done between these two different roles, but they're not synonymous. Among other reasons, Paul himself makes a distinction between pastors and teachers and evangelists in such texts as Ephesians 4:11, where it says, "And he gave some apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers." So they're two different things. In addition, in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul describes those that are entitled to be supported as those that preach the gospel. Now, while today, in modern times, pastors and elders might refer to themselves as gospel preachers, that is not really their primary responsibility. And I would challenge anyone to show me in the New Testament where pastors and elders are called to preach the gospel. I'll just cite one example of a pastor elder in the New Testament preaching the gospel. I don't believe there are any such texts in the New Testament. See, the role of the elder and pastor is to shepherd people who already know the gospel. And he's to seek to build upon the foundation of the gospel, instruct the church in many other wonderful truths from the Word of God. Now, it's fine if he speaks the gospel at times, but that is not his primary focus. In addition, please consider that the Bible indicates the gospel is the milk and basics of the Christian walk. And a man is not going to be a successful spiritual leader if he mainly just preaches the gospel all the time to a body of believers that already know the gospel. There's a place for giving people the milk of the word, good news, and that is when a person is an unregenerate sinner. The gospel needs to be declared to them. And if the sinner gets saved by believing in Jesus Christ, there's still going to be a need for further instruction to help that newborn believer be further grounded in the truths of the gospel. But there's more building up of a church. There's more to building up of a church than in just the gospel, which is the milk of the word. The church needs to be fed with meat. Right? It's analogous to a human being. When a person is a baby, it's appropriate to give them milk. But once they get older, they're to be fed meat and not just to be given milk. If the mother just keeps giving a child milk for years and years, up until the child is a teenager, the child is not going to develop properly. So this is one of the reasons why a pastor or elder isn't really it's not really a gospel work in the sense of what Paul is referring to in 1 Corinthians 9. Again, remember when Paul wrote 1 Corinthians 9, he's referring to his experience among the Corinthians when they were all very young in the faith. They were, as it were, spiritual babies. Now think of a woman who just gave birth to a baby and she goes on maternity leave, where she's allowed a lot of time off to bond with her newborn child. See, that's quite understandable, as a baby is wholly dependent on its mother and can't survive by itself for long. But imagine a woman who wants to go on maternity leave in order to spend time with her perfectly healthy 16-year-old boy. Most companies are likely not going to go for that because a healthy 16-year-old boy is relatively independent compared to a baby and doesn't require his mom to be with him all day long. So this is analogous to the situation with Paul and his experience as a gospel minister and church planner. Again, when it came to Paul's experience with the Corinthians, or any new church he planted, Paul was dealing with spiritual infants, and Paul, as it were, was engaged in spiritual daycare. And so it's understandable why it would be so time-consuming for him, as he would be dealing with many spiritual babies who are not independent. They need a lot of care and instruction, regularly fed the milk of the Word of God. They probably have all kinds of questions about their new faith. So this would require a lot of Paul's time as a church planter, gospel minister. But it would be much different if Paul was dealing with spiritual adults who have been in the faith for many years. They're not as nearly as dependent as spiritual babies, which is why a group of spiritual adults, which is what characterizes most sound churches today, don't require some kind of full-time overseer or pastor. So I hope this helps explain why evangelists and church planners like Paul were entitled to be fully supported, but not elders, right? Because they're two different kinds of work due to the fact that the nature of their ministries are very different. One is dealing with spiritual babies who are very dependent, who need a full-time worker, and the other is generally dealing with more mature spiritual adults who are relatively independent. Yes, they need a shepherd, elders to look over them, but they don't require a full-time worker as if somehow they're like little babies in a spiritual daycare. They need some men to watch over them and tend to them throughout the day. Well, thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. And of course, feel free to like and subscribe if you're interested in hearing more about this topic. Thank you.